Okay, perfect. So today's masterclass is all about using the exponential quotient and the EXO Canvas to drive exponential growth within your business. And the idea here is to essentially work through a process that we have worked through with many different clients all around the world, looking at leveraging the exponential quotient analysis and then using that to build out a roadmap to then implement the EXO attributes over time. Now, you may you may know me or not know me, but ultimately I'm Kevin Allen. I have been a part of the Open EXO community since 2017, and ultimately read Exponential Organizations in 2015, and really started, diving deep into how the model can help organizations. I did some consulting and then went through all the certification programs, and then ultimately joined the core team of Open EXO to help build out the community. At that time, back in 2017, there were about 250 people in the community, and we've obviously grown that quite a bit to today. And my personal MTP is about unlocking positive human potential. And so if we'll do a little bit of info that's a reminder. I'm sure everyone has seen a lot of these slides. So this is just a 5-minute recap. So we all know we're living in unprecedented times, right? Where there are a number of exponential technologies that are making a massive impact in the world. And these exponential technologies tend to be very disappointing in the beginning, but then cause amazement and chaos. Of course, we're over that crossover line when it comes to something like large language models, right? Those are currently in the very disruptive sort of phase of a technology. And the exponential organizations model, which was obviously put together by Salim and a number of early community members, really was asking, how do we ensure that organizations are equipped to leverage exponential technologies, and how can organizations scale at that same pace as we've seen with many exponential technologies? And so today's masterclass is not about going into depth into the EXO model. There's definitely other masterclasses out there on the platform. If you just head over to Learning, you'll be able to see those, and or many videos out in the real world going over exponential organizations. So we won't cover this, but of course, the EXO model is at the core of everything that we're going to be talking about today. And one thing that is really important for any existing organization, even if it is a small organization, I know a lot of the time people say, oh, well, if it's just a small, a small organization, there isn't really an immune response. But that's not, I don't believe that's really true. And so, a reminder of the immune response is really important. This idea that, within an organization, there is a fairly negative response to innovation, and ultimately, which tends to paralyze an organization, either not doing something, or making bad decisions by jumping ahead into a specific technology, for example. And so it is important for us to recognize this, and the idea around understanding your exponential quotients and then building out an EXO canvas with a roadmap of how we're going to implement EXO within the business is a way to essentially inject a bit of an immune suppressant into the organization, right? It's giving the organization a language to speak about how the organization is structured and how you are then leveraging those technologies. And that ultimately, really, brings down that corporate immune response, that immune response within the organization, right? This is a very overused example, of course, but this here is of course the first digital camera, right? Which obviously was invented by Kodak, or by an employee at Kodak, and at the end of the day, the balancing of innovation and risk became a factor in the decision by Kodak to essentially, patent it, but not necessarily, develop in the early days. And then when they were developing their digital camera, and they were selling quite a lot of digital cameras, their focus was still on print, right? Whilst they had their digital cameras, their focus very much was on printing your images versus them truly understanding their original MTP, their original massive transformative purpose, which was, to create the Kodak moment, or to be able to, capture your moments in life. And if they had, remembered that, perhaps they would have put a lot more effort into the digital side versus their acquisition of Photo, which they then turned into a way to try and get people to go and print the photos, as opposed to sharing the photos. Quite frankly, Kodak should have created Instagram at the end of the day, because they have almost identical MTPs. And so ultimately, this is really important in terms of this masterclass, because within a business, you are always going to have to balance this innovation and risk, right? You can't, as an organization, put all your bets on one new technology. And if we use the Kodak example, if in 1975 they had said, okay, we know that in the next 25 years, this is going to replace us, and therefore we're going to put everything into digital, the business would have shrunk tremendously for a number of years. But so you can't just throw everything into one thing. You need to be able to balance that process. And so when we go through the exponential quotient, and then start looking at the ExO Canvas, there are going to be attributes that you want to implement within the existing business. But then, whilst you're going through that process, you might find that by implementing different attributes, this might want to shift the way the business model functions. And if you're going to be changing your business model within your core business, that is going to obviously evoke a fairly large immune response. And that's where, as an organization, you need to look at actually implementing that on the edge, right? And so if we go back to the Kodak example, that may have been building out a subsidiary that ultimately focused on digital photo sharing, etc., and social media with regards to photos, etc. That wasn't within the core business, because ultimately what will happen is, if it remains within the core business, you then revert back to what your core business is. And this is exactly as I was explaining earlier, where with Kodak, Ophoto, they acquired them. They were an online photo sharing site, yet they then completely changed the way Ophoto worked in order to try and drive it into their current business model. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive right into the EXQ survey. And what I'm going to do is I am going to share the link to the EXQ survey, so that while we are going through, you can actually complete the survey as we are going through. I'm going to be sharing each question, just speaking a little bit more about which attribute that question speaks to, and we'll go through the EXQ survey in this masterclass, and then we'll get into a bit of the meat as to how you can then leverage that EXQ. Now, everybody here is I guess here as an individual, so you're going to have your one score. And what we do recommend when running this exercise within an organization is that you don't just run one EXQ, but that you in fact run the EXQ on a number of different levels within the organization. If it is let's say it is you're a 30-person a small business, I would recommend that everyone in the business actually goes through the EXQ. If you were, for example, a 100 or 200-person business, then you could look at taking a sample of folks from sales, from marketing, from operations, from finance, from management, and you then get a good understanding of where people see the organization in terms of the exponential quotient within the organization. And the same would be if you are a much even larger organization. You can then take a sample from those different levels. And so so I just put in the chat, so if you just go to exqsurvey.com, that will take you through to the exponential quotient survey. And so you will see that there will be a start button, and we'll then get into question number 1, which speaks to the staff on demand attribute, asking to what extent do you use full-time employees versus on-demand contractors. So this of course is speaking to the staff on demand attribute. And so obviously you would choose which of the options it is that you have within your organization. And what's really interesting is, and you'll see when we get to the end and we look at some examples, ultimately you will see that within different levels of an organization, to this question, you can get answers ranging from only full-time employees to mostly on-demand contractors within the same company, and so that then really gives you a good insight into the fact that there's not a common understanding between all the members of the organization. So that's question 1. Question 2 then is asking to what extent you leverage external resources to perform your business functions. This is talking at the leveraged assets attributes. When on question 3, this also talks to leveraged assets. So to what extent do you own versus rent assets in your organization? And so this question would also talk to leveraged assets. We then go on to question 4, which is to what extent do you manage and interact with your community? obviously this is speaking towards the community and crowd attributes. And so one thing that obviously can be very helpful in doing this exercise is, in fact, starting before you run these questions with a bit of a broader awake session, sharing the attributes so that people do get a bit of context, but then also running through the questions like I am right now can be really helpful, because it does allow people to ask questions. Should there be a misunderstanding of any of the questions, so that you don't get sort of false positives or whatever the case may be because a person misunderstood a question. So we then have question 5 around how do you engage with your community. So this is also, again, talking to the community and crowd attributes. And if anyone does have any questions, by the way, as I'm going through this, please do just get your voice heard. Question 6 is, again, community and crowd, which is saying, do you actively convert the crowd into community members? So this really is an indication of the this is actually an engagement question. This is really looking at how you engage your audience. And then question 7, looking at gamification or incentive competition. So to what extent are you actually using those? This question often gets people, people may think that, may not know that, of gamification, and at this time it might be a good thing to speak about that, to share about that, and just so you're making sure that the answers here are valid. We then go over to question 8, which is asking, to what extent are your products and services information-based? And so this question also does sometimes get people a little bit confused, because they might want to be in more than one. So it's a matter of saying, okay, pick the one that works the best. We then go to what extent is social functionality and collaboration in a central element to your product offerings, right? So this one's fairly clear. We then go to what extent do you use algorithms and machine learning to make meaningful decisions? So obviously, when the EXQ first came out, AI was not where it is today. So perhaps more people might be leveraging algorithms these days. We then go on to, do you have a specialized process for managing the output of externalities within your internal organization? And so this is an interfaces question, and this one people may also struggle with. So essentially, explaining it that outside of your organization, you've got a lot of information coming in. So like, how are you doing that? If you're doing that just with a person on the phone, then it's this dedicated staff member. If it is, an automated online form, etc., then you'd be here. And if you're using, APIs, etc., it would be, the bottom one. So this question does sometimes get, have people not certain what to answer. Then how replicable and scalable are your key processes outside of your core organization? And so this one I think is fairly clear, that you know, whether you're sort of traditional just with SOPs, you know, down to, you know, having you know, elements outside of your organization, you know, actually running key roles. We then have question 14, which is which metrics do you track about your organization and your product innovation portfolio? So here, this is really to, you know, to understand, you know, how people are actually tracking, so that you can get an understanding for the dashboard's attributes. And so I do think it's fairly clear. Then do you use some variants of objectives and key results? This may need an explanation of what OKRs are. If it does need an explanation, then obviously they should tick the first one. So this is also a dashboarding question. On 16, we've got, you know, does your organization constantly optimize processing through experimentation, A/B testing, short feedback loops? So yeah, this is an experimentation question. And so again, I think fairly self-explanatory question. Then to what extent do you tolerate failure and encourage risk-taking? So this one also about experimentation, and also I think fairly clear in terms of the answers there, from failure is not an option, or could be a career limiting move, down to, you know, failure is actually celebrated. And so yeah, so I do think that one's fairly clear. And then, does your organization operate with large hierarchical structures or small multidisciplinary self-organized teams? So this speaks to the autonomy attributes. And so again, fairly clear in the different levels. Shouldn't be a problem for people to answer this one. Although, as I did say, it is really interesting to see how when you run this across an organization at different levels, how you can get very different results here. And often that depends on the type of team and the manager, especially in much larger organizations, where you know, perhaps the management style is different. And whilst there might be a hierarchical structure within certain departments, you end up seeing that they are a lot more, you know, multi-disciplinary type teams, a much more networked approach. And then that allows you to perhaps have a champion for the autonomy attributes, for example. If we go to question 19, to what extent is authority or decision-making decentralized? This also speaks towards the autonomy attributes. And again, I think it's quite clear in terms of the responses there. Then on question 20, do you use the advanced social tools for knowledge sharing, communication, coordination, and/or collaboration? And so this speaks to the social technologies attributes. Remember, that's obviously very much an internal attribute. It's about how you are leveraging these tools internally in order to improve your communication within your organization, so that you can be improving your innovation capabilities. And so this I think is also fairly clear. We then have what is the nature and focus of your organizational purpose or mission? This speaks towards MTP. And so, and again, I think we're quite clear on the answers there. Then, to what extent do you? do you implement design thinking? And if people need to ask what design thinking is, they then are probably this top one, and then down to the bottom. This one you also see quite a spread of answers. Then are you trying to become a platform, or what extent are you a platform? And so this also gives insight into the aspirations of the business, and can be used to get a good understanding of where different members of the team are. Then how strong is your organization's immune system? This might require explaining a little bit more about an immune system within an organization. But if you actually read through the answers, it is quite clear. And this also is a way to determine which people from within the organization that are completing the EXQ, perhaps may be good to have conversations with, maybe good to bring together team members that are on opposite ends, people who believe that there's not a strong immune system, and those that believe there's a strong immune system. It can really bring about interesting discussion, which helps as you are building out the leveraging of the different attributes. And then the last question is just, where in your organization is innovation handled? And this, I mean, generally, if you're a very small organization, it's like this question is maybe you might find it difficult to answer, because it's like, well, we're really small, and so this question in that case might not be as relevant when running through that. But if it is a very large organization, this gives you a good understanding of the organization and the way it is innovating. And again, it also allows you to draw those parallels when multiple people have answered. And so once you have finished the EXQ, you will see that you will have a report page there, and there's obviously details asking you just about who you are and a few additional questions. And you will then see a report page, and there's also a PDF report that comes with that. And what you're seeing on the screen now is essentially what you then can do. And Bash, I just see you asked the question here about whether this can be used for startup businesses, and absolutely, running an exponential quotient can be very valuable for a startup. And in fact, using the EXQ as a benchmarking tool, running the EXQ and then building out the canvas and looking at how you are going to be implementing the different attributes, and then every quarter potentially running the EXQ again and determining where you are in your journey to implement the EXO attributes is extremely valuable. And so ultimately you'll see an example here. Obviously this is an individual scores. So in this case, it's a company that has an MTP. Dashboards are fairly good. Social technologies, they're looking at using community and crowd, but not experimenting and not doing so well in many of the attributes here. And then if you look over to the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see this is actually a real life example of an organization that we recently ran through this process with them. So step one was an awake session. Step two was running the exponential quotient. And so you can see here, this was a fairly small organization. This was pretty much the entire team. There were a few people who didn't complete, but you have everyone from the founder to the current CEO, the CFO, the head of learning was in here, the head of product development, the office manager, a content writer was here. So you can see a sales manager was in here, the head of operations was in here. So a wide range of people, and you'll see we had scores ranging from 45 up to 71 in terms of the overall exponential quotient score. And then you'll see on the different attributes, which I just put into percentage. You'll see all the different scores, and then those were mapped here onto a chart. And so you can see there was a lot of variance in terms of the exponential the attribute scores for the different EXO attributes. And so the fact that we have this picture means that now as an organization, you can really start having good conversations, and you can make really good decisions, because we can now base that on data. So running one exponential quotient doesn't really give you the whole picture. And now you can have really good conversations about that. I do see that there's a question from Alexandra just asking, has this been applied in the nonprofit sector? And the answer is yes. This has been applied in the nonprofit sector, as well as in the government, in government as well. So absolutely, this does work in that sector. And then Bash just asking, is it always best to do the awake and then the EXQ? In my opinion, it is a good idea to share with people about exponential organizations on the road to doing this, versus having people go in completely blind. But what is vitally important is sharing, that you obviously, especially for this initial EXQ, you want to be speaking about the current status of the business. This is not about where we want to be. It has to be about where we are. I mean, otherwise we will obviously get a very skewed picture. And so sharing that is vitally important, right? So in this case, if we just look at MTP, and I know it's pretty small on the screen there, but what you will see is that the majority of the people scored the organization with a really high MTP. But then we do have sales and CFO here as outliers. And so this is, the founder too was fairly low. And so this is then a really interesting discussion point. And so ultimately building out the next step after running this EXQ, which essentially is generally a debrief. That debrief may just be, depending on the organization, may just be with a team that is going to be, running essentially the exponential transformation of the business, and that team will then, go over that debrief, or you might want to essentially involve the entire team, again, depending on the organization. You might want to, bring in different team members. And what is vitally important when doing this, of course, is, creating that safe space, that this isn't, a witch hunt at all to like find out the people who scored us low. Scoring, the scoring and the data is vitally important, and the diversity of the scores actually is more enlightening than everyone just all agreeing with one another. And so making sure that it is clear that you have this safe space is vitally important. This is another reason why doing the awake up front is very important, because ultimately it is, sharing with the entire organization that we see that, an exponential organization is the way that, organizations of the future are moving towards. And we want to be one of those. We want to do that because ultimately we want this organization to thrive for everyone in the team. And that then is creating that safe space so that when people are completing this, they're doing it in a way that actually is beneficial, and that the data is good data. I see Eugene's just asking, when running multiple surveys in a company, how do you get consolidated mapping as you're sharing? So ultimately, if you are doing this DIY for your own organization, ultimately you would need to consolidate all of that manually yourself, right? If you are doing this as a done with you, where we work, and when I say we, I mean a coach from within the community works on a program like this, that would then ultimately be provided. Now in the DIY approach, for our pro members, for example, we would then work with those pro members to provide all the data in a spreadsheet, right? If someone is, a basic or a premium member, ultimately you're going to need to do some work yourself, gathering all that data in order to to get everything together. Now, what I have showed is I have showed this using the exponential quotient, which is in a new format, from what, if there are folks on the call that have gone through the consultant certification, for example, you may have used the EXQ, which was built into the Open EXO platform, and that is still available. So under the resources tab on the platform, you can find the exponential quotient dashboard, where you can actually create a survey where you get the results yourself, right? That is for certified consultants. That functionality is still available. But unfortunately, that functionality doesn't give a report, etc. And so we're using this new system, which doesn't yet allow us to actually give access to consultants to actually build their own surveys, as an example. So ultimately, what would be the next step is ultimately, leveraging the insights from the exponential quotient to then develop a current and a future focused EXO canvas. And so what you're doing now is essentially you're taking all that information that you have gathered through the EXQ and through a debrief of the EXQ with the team, where you now have looked at exactly where the organization is. You've been able to essentially find the middle ground on each of the attributes based on the different scores. Okay, so you've said you've come to a realization that we are strong on MTP, but we're weak here, we're mediocre here, and that then allows you to essentially on the EXO Canvas to then look at mapping out your organization now and where you want your organization to go. And we often speak about the fact that an organization with an MTP and at least 4 attributes can really make a massive impact in terms of innovation and therefore the potential for exponential growth within the organization. And what is really important in running this this EXO Canvas process is you really want to for the future state, you don't want to have a sprinkling of EXO attributes, right? Where you're trying to implement all of the attributes, but doing it in a way that it is very superficial. It is much better to focus on those 4 attributes that you can either take from they're currently sitting on a 4 or a 5, and you want to take that to an 8 or a 9, or you might find you have one that's sitting on a 7, but you believe it can be a 10, and actually that's the one to focus on because you've already got a whole lot of expertise within the business or whatever the case may be, and that's going to take you up to the next level. Or you might be saying, hey, there's attributes that are sitting at a 1 or a 2, but based off of looking at the ability to implement that versus the cost of implementing that, and actually weighing that up in this process, that becomes the attribute that you look to leverage and to implement. Now, obviously, what I'm sharing today is very much a step 1 in becoming an exponential organization. It's understanding where you are, from the XQ point of view, and then it's looking at the canvas and saying, where are we and where do we want to go? That's very much a step 1. And as an organization, you then can make a decision in terms of this implementation column as to how you actually want that roadmap to look. And we've worked with a number of different organizations, and there've been community members who've worked with a number of different organizations, and then there've been organizations out there that have done this on their own, just using the book and the EXQ, and we have only found out about things after the fact through discussions with them. And there isn't necessarily a fixed way of going about looking to implement EXO attributes. Yes, we do, and we have created the EXO sprint, 10-week sprint for existing organizations to implement EXO. It's a very fast-track process, very handheld process. And so if you want to, make sure you're implementing EXO within your business in a short amount of time, we know that is an amazing way to do that. It is very fast, it works, but it obviously takes up a lot of people's time, and there's a cost involved in terms of the coaches in order to do that. We have had people, of course, do it themselves using the book Exponential Transformation, which outlines the entire 10-week sprint process. And so it absolutely is possible to do it yourself. But ultimately, if you are going to take this approach, you can look at doing this in a number of different ways. Your organization, like the example I was showing earlier, that particular organization has focused on 4 attributes, and until the end of the year, they have 4 teams within the organization, and each are focusing on 1 attribute. And that is the way that they are going to tackle their first 4 EXO attributes. That is one way to go about it. There is an organization based in Australia, and their name completely slips my mind right now, that ultimately the entire organization focused on 1 attribute per quarter, and they have been doing this for 4 years now. And pretty much once they've gone through all the attributes, they then, start again. That's the role they've chosen. They have seen quite a lot of success doing it that way. And so there's not necessarily a fixed path to get to where you need to be. So what is, of course, vital is that if you do find from the assessment that the organization has no massive transformative purpose at all, that can sometimes maybe derail this process slightly, and really building a strong MTP, which this masterclass is not about, and there are a number of masterclasses around purpose and MTP. So if you want to watch any of those, do that. And or there's videos around MTP in the Learning Hub, in the foundations and online, etc. But a massive transformative purpose can be a fairly tough thing to get right. What is important is that it does not derail the entire process of becoming an EXO, is to work with the leadership of the organization to get a good enough MTP that the team can then rally around. It might not be the final best version, but ultimately that is better than sitting for 18 months trying to get an MTP, which we have seen happen within organizations, and that is really slowing you down. Now, the reason we are so strong on MTP is so many of the other attributes rely on an MTP, right? So, if you're gonna do staff on demand, right, MTP is important. Community MTP is important. Leveraged assets MTP is important. Engagement MTP is important. Autonomy MTP is important. So this is why, knowing, okay, where are we going as an organization? Why do we actually exist is vital, right? So that's really important, and ultimately, definitely something that you need to get clear with the team as you are starting. And then in terms of all the attributes, what you do want to do is you do want to complete the canvas for current state for all of the attributes, answering all of the questions in the EXO canvas, going through everything for the current state, and then that opens up the ability for a discussion to look at the next state, the future state, which is let's focus on 4 attributes. And when you are focusing on those 4 attributes, what you want to do is you do want to look at a balance between scale and ideas. So if as a team you say, okay, we're going to focus on, staff on demand, community and crowd, leverage assets and engagement, that ultimately is going to create an imbalance in terms of your external versus internal focus. And so I would recommend just let's look at 2 and 2. That's the simplest way to go about it. So that you are focusing both internally and externally of the organization. And you would then ultimately, once you have chosen those 4 attributes, you will then look at from an implementation point of view, what will that roadmap look like based on the organization, based on your resources, whether that is money or whether that is team members or whether that is time. You would then make the decision based on that, and that ultimately is where I am going to stop, because I have just seen the time and I want to give people at least 5 minutes to ask any additional questions. I know that some people have already had to drop off just based on additional meetings that they have. But does anyone have any questions? I know this was like quite a quick run through, and having done this a number of times, maybe there's things that you that you're saying I'm not super clear on how we would do that. So you can either just unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can just stick it in the chat.
I do have a question. I was trying to find the Canvas file online. I'm slowly noticing that people have taken it, reformatted it, created different versions of it. At the end, does it really matter as long as it's achieving the same thing? Is there one?
Yeah, I mean, so the EXO Canvas is in the Creative Commons. So we have had people who have remixed it and added a few things and made some changes. I will share here in the chat, and for those people who are watching the recording, we'll have a link to it in the description, just of the EXO Canvas. And this document is the canvas that has the questions, and then it has the blank canvas, and then it also has a third canvas with a few sticky notes on it as an example. So yeah. Bash, I know you were just asking about an updated Awake presentation. So within the resources, within the shared folder, I will go in there and just double check when last that was updated in terms of that Awake. Obviously, when it comes to an Awake session, the idea there is for people to to get an understanding of where the world is going and to introduce the EXO model. So where you generally right now, what's what has changed is there's obviously quite a lot of AI focus in terms of those that the technology side of things in terms of an Awake session. So if you do have an Awake session presentation that's fairly old, generally just updating some of the technology slides is really all that's required. The EXO model still pretty much stands the test of time, and the only attribute that looks like it's going to get disrupted is potentially staff on demand as staff on demand may not be humans. Staff on demand may be AI, avatars, etc., as opposed to being humans. But yeah. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. It's a pleasure. Any last questions before this masterclass comes to an end?
Hi, Kevin. Let me try to
Hi,
put my camera on. I hope my yes. I think as at Dapsona, we have really started trying to get into this journey. I think the most challenging right now is the immune system, and I'm wondering how we really get over the immune system. Would there be a masterclass maybe that is just focused on overcoming the immune system?
No, I mean, Una, thank you. I mean, I think that is actually an amazing masterclass. And you know, there are a few ways. I mean, obviously, you know, number one is to try and build out the EXO language into the organization. Now I know that you guys are really trying that. I mean, there's so much that you have done. And it's, I mean, obviously you need support from the as high up in the organization as possible to essentially say, this is our view, this is what we believe, this is where we're going, and it is for the benefit of all of you, in the team, because the one main thing about an immune response is that generally it is a fear of loss, a fear of change that creates that immune response, right? And so being able to show people and share with people that implementing this is for their benefits is a massive part of really driving that immune suppression. And so it is vital that all of the leadership are on board, that you can start speaking this EXO language so that it becomes the norm, and it's not scary that that you've just got a few people in innovation talking this way and the rest of the organization is saying, listen, you guys are crazy, so we need to shut you down, we need to slow you down, we need to stop you. But I will go back to the team to say, let's look at putting together a masterclass on immune suppression. And thank you for asking that. We have just gone over the time, and I have another call to get to. But it was wonderful for everyone being here. Thank you so much. The masterclass recording will, of course, go up in the Learning Hub. And if there's any questions, always reach out to us through the help tab on the platform. We're here to build as many exponential organizations as possible. If you want to work with someone, you can join our discovery workshop that happens every week, or reach out to us about becoming an EXO. Thank you, everybody, and yeah, we'll hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you, Kevin. It was really good.
Bye bye. Sure. Bye bye.
Bye.